Good evening, everybody. This is Pastor David with you again for another True Hope Tuesday. Today is Tuesday, June 20th, 2023, and we are continuing our series called Divine Not Slime. Yep, Divine Not Slime, and this is part 3. And tonight we are going to talk about something that is at the root of the differing worldviews, the creationist worldview or the biblical worldview, and the secular worldview or materialistic worldview, wherein there is nothing spiritual involved in creation or where we're at today. So what is really key here is the theory, yes, the theory of evolution. You've all heard of it. You've probably heard of the father of evolution, Charles Darwin. And so it's really critical that we talk about it. I was thinking tonight we might do just about Darwin himself, but I thought we'll hold that over because I want to really get into this meat and potatoes of these conflicting and battling worldviews. And as a side note, I should point out that there are other worldviews besides the two I'm concerned about here, which are the two that we deal with in this country and in the Western world in general. But there are in the world other worldviews. For instance, there are various Hindu worldviews that view everything as illusion, that it's not real what we're going through now. This is simply illusion. So just as an example of something else, but we don't typically run into that in this country, whereas we do run into the biblical versus secular worldviews. So I guess the first thing we need to ask, and by the way, I'm going to share my screen again, but not like last week where we have it up and we go through all the questions and answers. You'll see that shortly, but thought that was a little, it just didn't flow real well. So you're going to be stuck with my face for most of the show. So what do we mean when we say evolution? Excellent question, if I do say so myself. So when we say that in terms of the creation of the world or how the world began, we're talking about what is called macroevolution. So that is from the warm primordial pool of water to where we are today, and a time span of approximately 4.5 billion years. Compared to the biblical or creationist worldview, again, that is based on what the Bible says about where we came from, who we are, and where we're going. And that worldview shows everything in the universe to be, let's say, 6,000 to 7,000 years old. So huge discrepancy, right? I mean, there's just no middle ground here. It's one or the other. And neither side should try and accommodate the other because it's just not possible. That being said, folks like me, and perhaps you, don't see a conflict, right? Each side uses and has the same evidence to explore and experiment with and come to conclusions about. So that's what macroevolution is. Now, there are other types of evolution, a smaller scale. Sometimes that's called specification. So as opposed to from nothing to everything, there are changes within a species. That's also often called adaptation. Now, typically, creationists don't have a problem with that. They understand and accept that within species, there are changes over time. Species adapt to different environments, etc. Some species disappear, some grow stronger. Darwin himself points that out, but he draws a different conclusion from it. It's important to note also that within specification or adaptation, for example, Darwin's finches, as so-called, because he studied them for a long period of time and found through different years and seasons, some finches with short beaks really thrived. And then later on, years later, long-beaked or longer-beaked finches did much better. He saw this as an evolutionary train. But it turns out it would go back and forth depending on different environments and different issues. The finches would have long beaks, short, long, short, and it wasn't an A to Z. It was like A, B, C, A, B, C, D, whatever. Very much different. Important to note also, the finch was still a finch in the end. It didn't become a lizard or a mammal or a person. It stayed a bird. Important. Macroevolution, or Darwinism, as it's also called, says that through eons of time, billions of years, starting with the little protozoa and the warm primordial pool, we went through all these stages, and there were different branches, etc. And of course, I see things differently. I see as how God created us and how that is spoken of in the Bible. So I'm going to share my screen, see what comes up here. We don't need that. Okay, here's some of the questions we'll be getting to off and on through the program tonight. I'm not going to stick strictly to that because I want to hop around a little bit. And I'm going to show you a graphic next of something that's very interesting regarding evolution. So we've already spoken about how it takes billions of years. And over those years, layers and layers have formed on the earth, and they show us different types of plants and animals, all fossilized, etc. And I can see them as a creationist. You could see them as a secularist, that you believe in long ages, right? An old earth. I'm short ages, new earth. And we can talk about that and discuss that and give evidence how we believe those formed. Let me find my next graphic. Okay, so it might be a little fuzzy here. I apologize. So this is what evolutionists, Darwinists show in terms of how things began. So look at the bottom here. We're looking at 4.6 billion years old. You go up and up and up, 2.5 billion years old, 500 million years old, and you see all these Jurassic, Cretaceous, Miocene, Pliocene, all the way up to the present. And here we are up here. So, and these layers represent what you might see in the Grand Canyon, right? Layer after layer after layer, laid down. And these layers are massive. They cover entire continents or portions of various continents, if you include the seafloor, very uniformly. So the secularist says, again, 4.6 billion years old. So every layer you see here is at least thousands of years old, if not millions of years old. And you'll notice there's a 2 billion year period here where there is no fossil evidence. So no life, right? Just rock, just elements. Very interesting. And then all of a sudden, in the Cambrian era, also referred to as the Cambrian explosion, you start to see evidence of life. So just going to run through that again. Here we are up here. Here we are just a little 2 million years old. And here we are in this last Holocene era, 10,000 years ago. And this is kind of, I like this. There are many of these graphics out there, geologic epics. This is, I thought, a very humorous one because they have the archaeologists up there and the pterodactyl over here. Anyway, so I'm going to show you and go back to the previous screen. So the secularists says that these layers are built up over billions of years. Okay, the creationist like me says, no, this happened not uniformly over billions of years, but catastrophically over a very short period of time. So I'm going to scroll down here to a photograph of a fossilized tree. Ah, there we go. Okay, and you can see a hammer about yay tall down here at the bottom, so you can get a sense of this 6 feet or so of a tree trunk, fossilized obviously in layers. Now I just did a rough count going up through here of these various layers, and well, we're having a little thunderstorm tonight. If you could hear that. Okay, just making sure our dog is okay. So I counted just a minimum of 35 layers here. Okay, so the secularists would say that, I know this is not just about evolution, but about the age of the earth, but it'll make sense in the end. So 35 layers. So I would say, given that previous graphic, this is anywhere from 35,000 years of layering on up, maybe 1,000,000 years. You see the layers, and strikingly, of course, you see this fossilized tree trunk standing upright, as presumably it would have, growing. And so we have to look at how the secular geologist ages this and say, that means this tree trunk stood vertically over thousands and thousands of years without falling down, without burning, without rotting, until it was finally eclipsed and covered up completely. Now, I don't know about you, but if this was laid down during the time of Noah's flood, right, which was a global flood, it was catastrophic in nature, these layers would have been laid down perhaps in a year, right? I know it's 40 days and 40 nights of rain, but for the waters to diminish, it was approximately a year before the ark came to rest. Now, a year, I could see that tree would continue to be upright. And it must have been one mighty tree to withstand all those layers forming. So here's where there's a piece of evidence, and we come at it from 2 different points of view. And of course, I feel my argument makes more sense because, again, how could this tree stay vertical and not rot or burn or topple over after 35,000 or 3 million years, 300,000, however long a geologist would want to say those layers took to lay down? I don't know about you, but I find that really interesting and fascinating. So I just wanted to give you that graphic. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And here I am back with you. So isn't that interesting? So back to evolution. So the secular view of evolution states that life began from nothing, right? There was nothing, then there were elements, and then in this pool of steamy water, some energy came down from the sky, some chemicals got together, and there was this magic moment where life began. And from there, it developed into a cellular thing, and then multicellular, et cetera, until you get from that to us. So that notion of life getting from nothing is called abiogenesis. Let's see, I think I have my glossary up here. And then I will share my screen again. Okay, let me, okay, let me share my screen one more time. Okay, abiogenesis, informally and incorrectly referred to as the origin of life. It's the natural process by which life arises from non-living matter, such as simple organic compounds, right? Chemicals, minerals. And you add energy, and you get, in this theory, you get life. But scientifically, life doesn't begin from nothing. So the biblical view of creation is God created the heavens and the earth, right? That's the biblical view. It's important if you're a Christian, a Bible reading, Bible believing Christian, don't eliminate those first chapters of Genesis and give that to the secular view, because you've been taught that in school. Your whole life you were told that evolution was how things began. And if you believe that, then you have to believe that the universe is 4.5 billion years old. Next year it could be 5 billion. They keep adding to it. The evolutionist needs that length of time to make their theory work. Because can you imagine going from a petri dish to nothing, and then a particle of this, a protein, and then something more complex, a single-celled organism, to us? You need a long, long time. I'm not even sure 4.5 billion years is enough for that. But that's why they hold to the long ages, old Earth model. Again, this is just a theory. If you want to call the biblical worldview a theory, you're welcome to do that. We can't put these in a lab and use a scientific method. And we can't go back in time to be there at the beginning. We use the evidence we have, and as we discussed last week, we use the Bible, right? And we use genealogies to age from today back through time, through the people in the Bible, places, etc., to get to how old. And we had a range of 6.5 or 6,000 to almost 10,000 years, depending on who was doing the calculations. And there were some, based on our calendar versus the Jewish calendar, and how that was calculated, and how certain family lineages were calculated. But still, that's a pretty tidy number compared to 4.5 billion years. So you and I typically have been taught all our lives that the evolutionary view is correct. We're taught it in schools. If you're in California in a public school, you're not going to be taught the biblical worldview. I believe it is still illegal to teach that. Anybody in the chat can correct me if I'm wrong. Other states are not that harsh. So, I was raised that way. I was never told that was incorrect. We were not a church-going family, so I didn't get the other worldview. Sure, I had heard of Adam and Eve, the Garden of Eden, Noah's Ark, etc. Just, I never tried to make sense of one over the other. I just accepted that what my teachers were teaching me was true, that it was accurate. Excuse me. And that's, we're sort of taught to live that way, to give ourselves over to our teachers, doctors. We put our life in their hands. We put our education in their hands. So we give them quite a bit of trust. The other problem I have is that typically evolution is taught as a fact. It is not a fact. Any true scientist will tell you it is a theory. In fact, since it can't be taken into a lab and put up and experimented with through the scientific method, it's almost a presupposition rather than even a theory. So one step removed from even a theory, 2 steps away from a fact. Not sure you realize that or you knew that, but that's why I'm here. So just going to look back at our questions. This is sort of a general question about our worldviews, but it's a real problem looking at the worldviews. One says we came from nothing divine, simply a matter of eons of age and random chance, chemicals coming together, billions of years, and here we are. So where we came from nothing. That doesn't tell us who we are. That theory does not also tell us where we're going. The biblical worldview, has a very specific beginning. The beginning is with God, who created us. He spoke life into being. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. We know where we came from. We know who we are because we are his image bearers. We are his ultimate creation. We are very good. And we know where we're going because his word, the Holy Scriptures, tell us where we're going. It tells us where we might be going and where else we might be going, if you get my drift. So evolution is a theory. There's some things I want you to come away with this evening that are very important. Evolution is a theory. It is not fact. It is not scientifically proven. You can say the same thing about the creationist worldview. Neither is proven, neither is disproven. But which view makes the most sense given the evidence? So I showed you a graphic that would seem to me not make sense in the long ages, billions of years view, because how could that tree have stayed vertical for thousands or hundreds of thousands of years as those layers accumulated? In the biblical view, it's just a few thousand years, and with those layers accumulating during Noah's epic and that flood, it's much more realistic. Let me put it that way. So the other thing I'd like you to keep in mind as we go forward, let me give you another couple of terms. These two worldviews are also known as, the theories are known as uniformitarianism, meaning everything was uniform, and the processes we see of adaptation, of life going on, are the same. They're slow. You can't really see the changes because, again, it's 4.5 billion years old. So everything is uniform. Everything moves now as it moved then. Creationism is also called catastrophism, as in catastrophic, because things moved very quickly over those few thousand years to get from the Garden of Eden to where we are today. And Genesis tells us about how the world, the physical world, changed in that time. Right? The atmosphere was different. The earth was different. In the beginning, there was no rain until the flood of Noah. In that era, there was no rain. There was water in the firmament above us. There was water on the ground. Turns out the flood released water from the sky and waters from underneath the earth. And then after that flood, we have the great oceans. Anyway, that's for another day. But I just want to give you those two terms, uniformitarianism and catastrophism. Those delineate and describe those two different worldviews and how the mechanics need to work for them to make sense. And then, so I was going to get to one last point. Why is this so important? Not just to me, but why is it important as you're living your life and you're doing your work, interacting with people? If you consider the creationist worldview, the biblical worldview, that we were created by God for a purpose, and that he loves us, and that we are to love him, and that we are created in his image, then that gives our life meaning. It gives our life purpose, very specifically. If you adhere to the other view that life came from nothing, then where do you derive your purpose in life? How do you derive who you are? And how do you derive where you're going? There are people who believe both of these things who are very good people, and there are bad people who believe each of these. However, in general, the societies that have wrought the most destruction, the most evil, the most death, most mayhem, are countries, are civilizations who did not believe in God, who did not believe in the divine creation of the world, of the universe, and the divine creation of human beings. Right? Separate from everything else, all other life, God created us specifically and differently. So those countries, those civilizations who have wrought the most harm, the most torture, the most death, have all been godless countries, godless monarchs, godless rulers, tyrants, etc. It's probably billions of people now have been put to death because life was not valued as something divine. Conversely, people famously who I've talked to who are not believers hit me with, oh, the Spanish Inquisition, oh, the Crusades, Christians went out and slaughtered people and murdered people, and there were certainly wrongs being done. People did die. The Inquisition was terrible. The difference in terms of how many people suffered and died, it's minuscule compared to the godless rulers who have wrought destruction in this world through the millennia. There is no comparison. And just while we're at it, anyone want to put out there in the chat what the Crusades were about? Why did those people go to war in foreign lands? Well, you know what? When the chat starts, when this premieres, when we come to this part, I will add some information there in the chat or in the comments. So I'll leave that for when I'm chatting with you live. Thank you so much for being here. I know we covered a lot. And again, we have at least 4 or 5 or 6 more parts to this series. I hope you've been enjoying it as much as I have. This is of great interest to me, and studied it for many, many years. And I hope it is bringing you some things to gnaw on and think about. And all in all, of course, to always help you, as it says in 1 Peter 3:15, to sanctify the Lord and to be ready always to give an answer to anyone who asks the reason for the joy that is within you, and meekness and humility. We always want to be able to defend our faith. That's what we talked about, I think, in episode 1 about apologetics, right? Proving the Bible. You can't know about everybody else's faith. I mean, you can. I love the study of comparative religions, but it's easier and more important, I would say to you, as you're going out there, as you're evangelizing, as you're sharing your faith with friends and neighbors and family, you need to have a real good grasp of what your faith is and how to describe it and how to defend it. So that's another reason why we are having this particular series. So thank you again so much for joining me tonight. God bless and keep you, and we'll see you again next Tuesday. Until then, bye-bye.